sample and line everything up blind. So this year we tasted over 1,000 wines and gave them a score. And the offer, which is live currently, is made up of the 50 or so winners, one of which is, of course, from Zephyr. So this was tasted in our Chardonnay tasting. Just to kind of give a bit of context, we have a rough outline, a rough kind of title for each Wine Champions tasting. And, you know, we're tasting something different every day for about 3 weeks or so. And Chardonnay is well, the Chardonnay tasting is exactly as you would think. It's just a load of Chardonnay from all over the world. We have a load of top white Burgundies in there. We also have, you know, Chardonnays from, well, all four corners, really. It's obviously a grape, as we all know, that's traveled extremely well. And so therefore the competition is extremely tough in the Chardonnay tasting because there's a lot of very good wine in there, frankly. So to stand out, you've really got to be, you know, a pretty special wine, let's say. So I was absolutely chuffed when Ben's Chardonnay stood out from the crowd. It was a relatively new listing, and it's always nice as a buyer when you find something new for it to be appreciated by everybody else. And this really, you know, to come out on top in a tasting that was so well, where the quality level was so high was fantastic. So I thought, you know, kudos to Ben, really. Yeah, so hopefully those of you who are drinking the Chardonnay along tonight, you'll be able to see why we were so blown away by it. But I won't say too much more. I'll go over to you, Ben. Thank you for joining us. It's crack of dawn for you, so you're no doubt not on the Chardonnay, but Anna was saying on a coffee. And what time is it for you at the moment? I can't quite remember. Is it 11 hours ahead of us?
Cheers, Freddie. Yeah, look, it's what we like to call sparrow fart at the moment. Not even the birds are quite up. You know, and being that sort of Matariki, it's pretty dark at the moment. So we'll get sun up in about half an hour, which will be 7:30ish.
Oh God!
So we're in the midst of winter.
Good luck. So good luck staying awake. Good luck trying to string a sentence together. You're a braver man than I.
So I've had a shot. I've had a shot of coffee, so I'm wired, ready to go.
Perfect. So you'll probably start to dip in about an hour as it wears off. So we'll try and get as much out of you before then. So Ben, thank you very much for this. Yeah, I mean, take it away. I'm excited to hear what's what.
Jeepers, all right. Well, look, thank you very much for the lovely comments on the Chardonnay. And look, I was pretty blown away, to be honest, in regards to the Wine Champions program that you run. I didn't know anything about it, so it was a big surprise. And probably, I suppose, it's always good getting a third-party endorsement, but from a really good consensus and a professional group of tasters, which obviously you and the rest of your team have a big view on what your customers are looking for. So that, I mean, that flows right through to my decision making in the vineyards, through to style, and then through to making sure it's actually what our drinkers like to drink from a Chardonnay style. And certainly I've been working on that for the last few years. So, and probably just backing up a step, I'll just talk a little bit about Zephyr, because it is a new listing for you. And my involvement. I grew up in a dairy farm in Marlborough, so born and bred. And when I was about 12, my old man realised that none of his kids wanted to milk cows at 4 a.m. So even this morning now, it's a bit early for me. Imagine if I was milking cows. And I think the other thing too is I discovered quite quickly that wine was a lot healthier for you than milk. And so he transferred across to grapes. And then that's just sort of rolled on from that. It's that pricked my interest. Still on the vineyard, still on the farm. Still love the practical side of farming. And I got introduced to Wine Society pretty early on because I was the winemaker at Wither Hills. And one of the links is that the main batch for the Wither Hills Chardonnay that we used to show here is actually the Zephyr Chardonnay, but made entirely different because obviously styles involve, and what I want to do with Chardonnay is involved. So it's off the original block that we used at Wither Hills. But this time round, I suppose the Chardonnay is more about eloquence and elegance, and not being too oak dominant. So there's not a lot of oak that goes into the Chardonnay, although it fully sees barrels, but not a lot of new oak. So I want to see nice line and good crunchiness. And a new word I found the other day, juicidity, which is juicy and acid. And I think that's really key in regards to a lot of wines. And then you build around that. So Chardonnay as a whole, you're sort of looking at grapefruit pith, citrus, some ripe melon notes, and then you do get into a bit of a white peach character, but you don't often get to apricot or fig or sort of those more richer stone fruit notes. We're quite lucky. If you have a look on those maps, Anna or whoever's running the maps for the team, you'll notice that we're quite coastal. We're about 3 miles from the high tide mark, and we've got a river that sort of borders our property. And you'll sort of see it's outlined there. And so that, if you look at the top of that picture, that's Cloudy Bay. So that's looking sort of north west towards the North Island. And so we're quite influenced by that coastline, and we tend to get almost a saline umami character or a savouriness coming through on the palate, which also helps that juiciness I sort of talked about. Yeah, so that's it there. And so you got the Wither Hills in the bottom corner, the Richmond Ranges in the top left, and that's the Wairau Valley essentially. So it's about 15 miles, 20 miles across, and it's about 35, 40 miles deep, you know, running from that coastline. So it's a lovely valley, protected. Those hills in the bottom right are protected by protected from the southerly as such, but also that's a really key part of Marlborough. It's that cooling southeasterly that comes up from Antarctica. And that's where we get that loveliness and vibrancy from. So it's that vineyard is 3 years ago, my wife Susie and I bought half the block off my mum and dad, Owen and Wendy. They still live on the farm. Dad still runs the farm. But the half we bought, we immediately put into organics. And so 2020 is the first year that the wines become fully certified. So from 2017 through, they've been in transition. So the 18 is a transitional, organically made Chardonnay. And I just think there's better nuances that come through, and there's more. You see more from the property. There's a fantastic Maori word, te reo, that's tūranga waiwai, and that just means a place where you stand, or your sense of place, or where you feel your home is. And I think it's got some great nuances to how you look at wines and what you do in your vineyard to get that final wine in your glass. I think I've spoken enough for 3 minutes. Sound all right, Freddie?
Sound perfect, absolutely perfect. I think Anna's
sounding great. We've got a couple of images as well up. Would you be able to talk?
So that's the Power River there on the right. So it's a meandering river. Look, it used to be the main transport route that drove all our freight and stuff out of the North Island. It used to go over the Wairau Bar and come up into Blenheim. And so on the left there is our organic vineyard. And you'll see the dark patch in the background, about there. That's yet to be pruned, and that's Dad's vineyard. So there's a driveway that runs in between the organic block now, and then I suppose what we used to call the conventional block. But all that pruned organic piece is where my varietals come out of. So my Riesling, Pinot Gris, Chardonnay, and gewurztraminer, and of course some Sauvignon Blanc. Oh yes, so this is like it's sort of a map of that vineyard. So it sort of tells you some of the sub blocks in there. So like with that Chardonnay, we've got a stock bank block and a cottage block, and they're two little parcels about 0.8 of a hectare. That and the clones, if you've got customers that are train spotters and like numbers and stuff like that. The main clone's a Mendoza clone, which is a clone. We're not too sure where it's from, but it's a really unique. It's got a lot of melanderage or hen and chicken, and it gives really good intensity and lovely acid. And then another clone called Clone 95, which I believe is sort of a champagne-based clone. So again, great acidity. They don't tend to be too fruity, so they tend to hold that citrus zone, which is superb in Marlborough. And you got the deer block to the right. You know, they're just words that we used to farm deer too. So we did a lot of diversification in the 80s. Dairy farming, deer farming. We grew garlic. We're one of the largest garlic growers in the late 70s. So yeah, pretty good stuff. And as you can see, being close to the coast, pretty fertile soils, but not fertile aggressive, just really fertile expressive.
And Ben, we jumped over the first picture, so I hope you don't mind. I'm going to steer you, for better useful word, back to it, and wondered whether you might be able to talk a little bit about the name of your winery. Sorry,
yes. Well, picking a name for a brand's always tough because everyone's trademarked something. So I got to the back of the thesaurus, to the Z's, and found Zephyr. But really, it's actually the name. It's the Greek god of wind, so Zephyr or Zephyrus, and that's probably Marlborough's best kept secret. So that Zephyr is normally a warm, gentle wind, but we sort of, with a bit of poetic license, we're using the winds on that Wairau plain, you know, so the southeasterly that comes up from the Antarctic that cools the place, but also we get quite windy sort of through that equinox time, and that northwest that comes across over from Australia and over our main divide, because the South Island's basically got a big spine up the middle of it, and so they've got to drop all the rain on the west coast, and then all those sort of warm, dry winds come across that plain through October, November. And that really dries out the plain and ripens our fruit. And then we get cooler nights, which essentially holds onto that acidity and that brightness. Obviously, that's the front of a vehicle. There's also a fantastic car in the 60s that came into New Zealand. It's our modern day sedan, family wagon vehicle. And it's a Zephyr. So Ford Zephyr, I think there's a few in the UK as well. And for the wine society in particularly, I've done that Sauvignon Blanc called Zephyr 6. So the car I own is actually a Zephyr 6. For those motoring enthusiasts, which I'm certainly not one, I wouldn't be able to know which end was the distributor cap versus the carburetor, but it's a straight 6 cylinder, and that's where the Zephyr 6 comes from. So there's a bit of a link there for the wine society team with that Sauvignon, which comes off that vineyard that we just saw before in the pictures and the maps.
This one here.
That's me. Yeah, a bit hairy. Yeah.
Would you maybe be able to tell us a little bit about the winemaking process? So
yes, certainly.
We've obviously got the 3 wines on sale at the moment. Maybe if you could briefly talk about all 3, but then in particular the Chardonnay at the end as well, that would be brilliant.
Righto. So look, my winemaking philosophy really is, and that's across all these wines, is to keep them pert. So they should be able to be nice and bright and expressive, but not over the top. So if you take Sauvignon Blanc and what Sauvignon Blanc's done for the last 35 years, almost 40 years now in Marlborough, it was like riding a big wave on a Malibu, you know, and you're chasing your tail. So I think we were trying to get more and more, you know, blow your nostril hair off with all those big punchy characters. I think those characters can become a bit artificial, and you can see the wines sort of die in the hole after 12 months because you're really trying to prop certain flavors up and aromas up. So my view with all my aromatics is the nose will always be there. Look after your fruit, and then really work on making sure you've got good palate weight that can help contribute to the whole experience of drinking that wine. So it's not just about the aroma. Often I've found, you know, you'll drink a Sauvignon and you'll be left wanting because everyone's just concentrated on the nose. So the seduction piece. So the seduction is really important, but it also has to get all the way through to the back of the palate, and that drink has to be enjoyable, and not just the first glass. So my whole view, particularly around my Dillon's Point site where that vineyard is, it tends to provide really good sort of almost herbal, fennel, cardamom seed, jalapeno, melon and guava. It's also a site where you can manipulate it through yeasts and really get those big punchy passion fruit, and those big, blow nostril hair off sort of characters. So I don't really, to me, I think that's one-dimensional. So I want to see all the dimensions off and also express that vineyard side. So for me, it's about getting the acidity right and getting all the lovely flavour and texture profile. And again, I talked about with that Chardonnay being a bit sort of saline on the palate. The Sauvignon Blanc certainly does that as well. So it really pricks up your interest, and it makes your taste buds do a little bit of work. So I'm trying to make philosophy wines, make wines that are enjoyable, easy to drink, but also if you want to be serious, they do prickle up and make your taste buds do some work and make you become a little bit cerebral with how you're looking at your wines. So that's sort of the aromatic side of it. Chardonnay I sort of treat as a bit of an aromatic, but certainly it's, for me, Chardonnay must have wood. It's sort of lost without it. So it needs that propping up, or it needs that support, but it doesn't, the wood shouldn't overblow the wine or where it's from. So the wood is tertiary. It's just like when you walk into your house, the wood's on the floor. There's a reason for that. So that's your baseline. And then you've got that lovely acidity that you see. And then you're picking up all those lovely aromas of, white peach and a bit of nectarine sometimes as well, and citrus and that pithiness that you see on the inside of a grapefruit skin, and then lovely acidity. So for me, it's all pretty simple. It's hands off. So my winemaking really is the Zephyr 6 Sauvignon is all machine picked. So it's all about getting that fruit in quickly, off skins, nice and pert and bright. Chardonnay is actually hand picked. So I'm a big believer in hand picking, and you're probably fairly lucky. I'm not sure the price point, but I'm probably, I would believe, over delivering in the way I'm handling the fruit into that glass. I know here in New Zealand it's $30 a bottle. It probably should be 40, but that's just the way it goes. People have to still drink your wine. So hand picked, whole bunch pressed, straight to barrel. So it sequentially goes to barrel. It doesn't go to a tank in between. So I'll end up, say, picking 5 ton. It'll go into a press, and then I'll just fill the barrels sequentially. So each of those barrels essentially are a different ferment, because they're at different stages of that juice being squeezed off those bunches, and so they'll have a different structure to them. So as you squeeze your fruit through your press, the wines become broader and broader because you're getting more flavors from the skins, and so technically your pH, which is a measure of acid, gets higher and higher. So the higher your pH is, the more alkaline you are, which is basically soapy. So what that does, as you get higher and higher, the acid drops down and your palate broadens out. So essentially I've got 20 different ferments going, but off the same block. And it just allows me to, I suppose, pick and choose when we come to blending about where I want to sit in that range of acidity to give the wines that brightness. Often in New Zealand, there's a big trend as that came through probably from Australia with the Oak Ridge wines and being a bit more leaner and funkier. I think in New Zealand, particularly Marlborough, we're lean enough and we get lovely fruit brightness, but certainly there's that flint and struck manch and funk trend going on in your nose. Just like Sauvignon Blanc with the passion fruit, it shouldn't be all funk. And funk essentially shouldn't really roll onto your palate, and that'd be the only thing you see. So it's all about the nuances and the complexity and the texture, and it's just part of one of those small things you do with your wines, particularly your Chardonnay. So sits in oak, probably only about 15% new, French. I'm currently going into larger formats, so sort of 500 litres. So what's that, 120 gallons versus 60-gallon barriques in the old days, and that just keeps the wines a bit more taunt. They don't see as much oxygen, permeating through the oak as it sits and lives and breathes over winter for 10 months. So sort of 10 months, and then we look at blending, our time, November, December, and then we go through to bottling March. So my 2019, we bottled in March, and we'll look to release that in New Zealand next month. So it's sort of, that's sort of how it rolls. But I've got no problem. They're still lovely, bright and alive. If I had to release in December, 6 months later. Was that enough information?
Thank you, Ben. I think that was brilliant, really brilliant, very informative. Yeah, and hopefully, I know that some members will be drinking the Chardonnay this evening along with us. Others, like myself, might have pre-ordered it because the next Wine Society batch is currently on the water, isn't it? It's on its way to us. So yes, if you haven't had chance yet, then hopefully you will be able to pick up some of the Chardonnay. We actually have nice pictures of your family as well, Ben, and I wondered if, well, there's a whole host of them actually, and I wondered if you might be able to talk a little bit about life at the winery.
I'd be lying if I said it wasn't busy. Yeah, look, I'm pretty lucky really. We grew up on a farm. We're now running half the farm with mum and dad. And I've got 4 gorgeous kids and a really lovely wife. So I think Leah, she almost looks like one of my kids. So, but they're all now 17 through to 12. So they're all sort of coming out that stage with their young adults. And I'm definitely not the alpha male in the house anymore. They don't listen to me. They answer back. They think I'm a dick. So I like embarrassing them, which is fantastic. But look, yeah, it's all pretty cool. It's very good. They help out, so they do. I do a little. This is not a plug, but I do a little orange wine on the side. But it's more about family, and they have to pick it, and they have to harvest it, and then they hand bottle it. So it's just slowly getting them involved in the vineyard. My eldest son, who's 17, he's done 2 vintages over Easter in between school break, and he brings 3 or 4 mates in, and they just go nuts and love it. And my daughter, who's 15, I'm going to get her in the lab and run around this year as well for this coming vintage. So it's all pretty good. I think, we work too hard, and luckily I've got a job, I suppose, where they can be involved or start to be involved in the business and actually understand what the hell I do. But it's pretty tough, I'm a winemaker. People, I'm sure they've all got their own ideas what that actually means, but at the end of the day, it's tough work. And I think it's agricultural or horticultural or viticultural to start with. And if you don't have that basis, I think it's very hard to present your wines all the way through from where they're from into that glass. So,
yeah, it certainly feels like it's a farm and a winery at the same time. Which is
and I should say, Anna, too, the winery, too. What's that?
No, continue.
Just the winery. There's a quick shot of the winery there, leaning against the wall. So 2 years ago, another mate of mine and I bought the old Saracen winery, which is a fantastic site on the Greenwood Terrace, and we've renamed it the Coterie. And that's where I met Freddie probably 18 months ago, 2 years ago, when he came out. And we've set that up as an organic custom crush facility for, I suppose, like-minded people. So coterie is a word where it means it's more normally a political, poetic sort of bent. Probably Hemingway and co would have been called a coterie. So it's just a group of like-minded people that have a vision, and they're collective and inclusive and want people to be better, do better, and show their wines off better. So it's a small contract facility. Obviously, Zephyr wines are in there, but we've got about 7 other small organic clients that make their wine there as well. So it's a pretty exciting little venture. It's all about making Marlborough better organically too.
Ben, so we're going to take a few questions from people. I can see we've had a few questions come in, which is fantastic, and it's been really informative. Actually, it's been great. One thing actually that is amazing is I was actually out there with you. You mentioned sort of 18 months, 2 years ago, because of course time does fly when you're having fun, or actually in this case, apparently it's the opposite. But it was actually almost a year ago to the day, well, nearly, that I was out there with you. I was just trying to find the exact date, but it was the beginning of July.
Only a year.
Yeah, it's only been a year, I know, gosh. Yeah, it does seem like a long time ago. A lot's changed since then, and actually we've obviously been working a lot more closely together since then.
Yeah.
Fantastic. I was just going to kick off the Q&A with a couple of questions, if I may. The first thing, obviously in Marlborough as a region, the first grape variety that people think of generally is Sauvignon Blanc. But as a man who makes, now what do you make? You've got obviously Sauvignon, also Riesling, Pinot Gris, Chardonnay, Gewurz, Pinot Noir. If you were to take Sauvignon Blanc out of the picture, which of those grape varieties do you think would have the greatest potential, A, for world domination, and B, just in terms of sheer quality in the region?
Oh shit! It's a bit like picking your favorite child.
Oh, every winemaker always says that exact same answer, and I say, everybody's really got a favorite child. Come on.
Of course, I've got a favorite. If you take Sauvignon Blanc out, look, I think the uniqueness about Marlborough is the aromatic presence that the wines have and the acidity. So anything that enjoys acid, so I would have to say Riesling, even if it's that real clear mirror pond, style, really tight and clean, which is the style I make, or even the ones that are a bit more worked and they've got a bit more phenolics and grip. It's a lovely wine that shows off the region. And then you flip the other side. If you commercially, what we see is Pinot Gris tends to be taking off, but it's almost like it can be made almost anywhere, and still have good quaffability or choppability.
Yeah.
But really, I think what's coming on is probably the two Burgundian wines, the pigeon pair of Chardonnay and Pinot, and I think we'll see more and more of that. But you'll have to search, like anything where the old 80-20 rule, 80% Sauvignon and 20% the rest. You need to search and find your producer and your style. But they're certainly out there in Marlborough.
Okay.
Like for me, for my business, I don't want my Sauvignon Blanc program to be over 70% because I think it's a risk, but it's also a positive. But I don't want it to be an Achilles heel. You'll find a lot of producers probably 90% Sauvignon, out of Marlborough. But I ideally believe for the fabric of the region, that's why I make Riesling and Gewurz as an example. But they're tiny and they're in decline from a drinking point of view. But I still think you need to show them off.
Absolutely. And obviously, as you quite rightly say, there's a lot of people in Marlborough who, Sauvignon is 90+% of what they do. And, that's understandable, I guess, because the world has gone crazy for Marlborough Sauvignon. But is there a sense amongst winemakers in Marlborough of any sort of kind of fear that bubble might burst one day? Because if you've got all your eggs in one basket, as you say, it's a risk.
Yeah, I think people used to ask Henry Ford that too, didn't they? With the Model T, as long as it's black. Look, I think there's a generational development, and there's it's only 30 years, so really in the scheme of things, it's small. I think for people down under, we're probably a bit impatient and we want to do more, be more. So I think the challenge now is, and what you're probably seeing is, sub-regional styles or an extension of that traditional Sauvignon Blanc style, which I think is really important and an add-on, and it allows as the consumer tastes change and they look for things, we still want them to drink Sauvignon, but you're going to see other wines. So I suppose for me, a bit like that Mark III that I do, which is totally non-Sauvignon like, but it's made from Sauvignon, but it's probably a white fruited style, not a green fruited style.
And this is influenced much more by barrel and by lees, and is that right?
Yeah. And just trying to blow the greens away, which we got seduced by, in the late 80s, in the Cloudy Bay, story, and that captured the hearts of the globe a little bit, yeah. And that's what you're seeing, like the Dog Point 94, the Grey Wacky Wild. There's a whole lot of other of those ones as well that are starting to come through. What's interesting, if you look at Tifore Rare with their Toru, so it's a blend of white grapes. If you think about Europe's always been sort of a blend and not necessarily a single white varietal. I think we're going to start seeing a merging of that too, and a bit of a play around with, say, a Marlborough expression as opposed to Sauvignon Blanc as Marlborough, or Marlborough as Sauvignon. So just extending or stretching that talking point.
Brilliant. Thank you, Ben. So I'm going to hand back over to Anna, because I think she's going to field a few questions from folks. So Anna, is that all right if I hand over to you?
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, Freddie. So Ben, I've actually got sort of an extension of that question. I'm going to combine a couple of questions from members. So we had a question from Graham and another question from Chris. They were sort of asking, is there anything more in development? So are there any more grape varieties you might be developing? Graham suggested something like Viognier, any other aromatics. And do you plan on doing any blends?
I think what we're seeing in what's cool about the coterie in the collective, you've got 10 different people making their wines. So, and it's all about collaboration. So you're seeing what different people are thinking. So it actually keeps you quite invigorated and wanting to experiment, but it's in-house. So we're seeing more skins work on whites. So if you take the amber revolution or the natural orange, that's essentially what that is. And to try and get more palate, more flavour through that. Style-wise, I think we're relaxing on having really polished wines, which are wines that are not necessarily slippery, but we're just leaving a little bit more in them. So that's just the phenolics, which is a bit like you leave your tea bag in your cup of tea for an extra minute, and there's more grip. But it's a sweet grip. So your phenolics or your grip has to be ripe. So I'm seeing more of that. Look, I'm playing around with I do a blend, an amber blend, and it's a field blend. So it's Riesling, Gewurz, and Sauvignon. I've done that for the last 4 or 5 years. And that's been really interesting. And I did, if you think about style, I've done that for about 8 years now with my Gewurz, all on skins, and that just provides that Gewurz, provides the framework for my gewurztraminer. So there's things like that going on. I think traditionally people used to just throw more oak at something and go, hey, this is an alternative style, but I think we've got smarter on that too. And I also think we're seeing vine age in New Zealand, in Marlborough. So that's a whole different story of understanding how these mature vines actually look in a glass, or what you can do with them, as opposed to those effervescent adolescent vines that we've been used to in the first 15, 20 years of our life. I don't know if that's answered the entire question.
I think so, yeah. It sounds like there's lots of exciting developments going on, so things to look out for.
Yeah. I think, sorry, and varieties, I think that's the one, wasn't it? Yeah, I think certainly blends, but I also perhaps looking for, Pinot Blanc, but into a blend, so we're looking at that more white fruited, I mentioned before, white fruited zones where you're looking at palate texture, not just aromatic seduction, that type of thing.
Fabulous, thank you. Now we have a member who's hopefully going to be able to ask their own question. So Jan, I'm hoping that you have been unmuted.
Hello there, can you hear?
We can indeed. Hi Jan, good evening.
Good morning, Ben. As an ex-dairy farmer myself, I wish I had been able to give up milking cows and go into wine myself. And I do sympathise about getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning. Just a quick question, really. When I was, I have to admit, I haven't bought any Zephyr products, but I'm certainly going to give them a try. But I was looking at the Wine Society comments today, and there's a comment from a member who says that he felt that the Chardonnay benefited from decanting and not to serve it too chilled. Do you have any thoughts on that? I mean, I've never decanted a white wine in my life, but
no. Look, being a ex-dairy farmer, I'm fairly agricultural, so I would just suggest do what you like and experiment. So something like that. The buyer may have tried the wine and found it a bit cold and tight, and then decanted it and gone, hey, look, that's really opened up. So you'll find my Chardonnays they're not taunt tight, but they're an opaque colour, so they're not a golden colour when they're released, and they tend to hold, that nice sort of green straw colour, so not to golden. So I think certainly if you do want to open the wines up, yeah, give them a bit of a splash. That's fine with whites as well. Probably not so much aromatics like Riesling or Sauvignon, but certainly some of the wines that do sit in oak for a while. It could have been a sulphide thing, so the sulphide on the nose could have been a bit too pronounced for the member, and he just wanted that to soften out and integrate a bit more into the wine. I think certainly when the wines are first poured, they're always, in that tube of the glass, they're always tighter. Just like in a restaurant, it's often the bottom of the bottle. It's the most appealing glass you have.
Brilliant. Yeah, we small secret, but our department's room is right next to the tasting room. So when they do wine champs, the tastings and events team scurry in and quickly blind taste a few things as well. And actually, we're really fortunate because we're last. So we get to we have that delicious bit right at the bottom, and it's almost like it's saved for us. I'm sure my colleagues are now horrified at us scurrying into the tasting room, but it was certainly the same with yours, Ben. We do have another question as well, and I'm not sure whether you are able to be unmuted, John Glanville. But if not, I'm happy to ask on your behalf. So John was asking about the closeness to the sea. Does it actually cause you any problems?
Normally the best little nuances that you pick up also create the other side of the equilibrium, don't they, John? So yeah, it does cause big problems, particularly drought years. So we get an influence of salt, saline notes, and that certainly has an impact on grapes. So some years we'll get, you'll start getting a bit of rusting around the edge of the leaf, and we've put that down to salt issues. So we irrigate, but it's almost like, and it's probably an area where you go, geez, you don't have to irrigate, you're so close to the coast, it's artesian, but often in drought years we're irrigating for dilution to just keep the saline levels down out of the soils. And so I suppose the next thing on with that, if you're looking 30 years out and you're looking at climate change and rising sea levels, I saw a picture about 3 months ago that in 2050 the vineyard's going to be half under salt water. So that's another challenge we'll have in hopefully my lifetime, at least part of it, to work on how we fix that. With an organic point of view, we've got a lot of work to do with our soil to get that, to make that a kingdom, to be honest, to make that living. We're only 3 years into it, and I think we can't put artificial stuff on it to negate that salt and also, provide nitrogen. So we're doing a lot of work with planting cover crops, winter crops, to provide that nutrient and to bring that soil back to life, which hopefully makes the vines healthy and doesn't make the salt intrusion as much of an issue as it is, particularly in drought years.
Okay, an honest answer. I think the answer is yes. There are challenges from being near the ocean. Yeah. So we have another member, Chris, and I apologise, Chris, we couldn't find you to unmute you. But Chris would like to know in particular, so how does it compare with other Chardonnays from around the world?
Sorry, I missed that, Anna. What was the question?
How does Marlborough Chardonnay compare to other Chardonnays around the world? What's an identifier for people looking for Marlborough Chardonnay?
Well, it's the best, really.
There we go.
Chris, look, to be honest, look, in the old days, we fell into the 80s when I first came into that winemaking scene, and started looking at wines around the world. We're in that cordon bleu space, so 100% Malo, 100% oak, creaminess. We forgot about toastiness and brioche, and so it was just a big plump pile of, of I don't know what to call it. So I think we've worked out, particularly in Marlborough, where we have acidity, that's our real key. So once you find out what your key is with your fruit, you can build around that. So if you wanted to be really sort of broad, I would say Marlborough is Chablis-esque, but probably without all the shells. You know, if you know what I mean, because you've got that all the limestone and that nuance in the sea, you know, the shells in the soil, and so I think that's to do with acidity. So that's our profile. We're not warm climate, so we're cool climate. And so that's what I sort of look at, particularly when you're looking at Chardonnay that's seen oak, but not a lot of huge oak. It does tend to have that, you know, lovely understated Chablis-like look.
Fabulous, thank you. I hope that answered your question, Chris. I think it did. So we have another question, if that's all right, from Simon Godfrey. And Simon, I hope you've been able to be unmuted.
Yep, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Certainly can.
Marvelous.
Yep.
Ben, I've really enjoyed your banter this evening or this morning for you.
Thank
particularly
you.
Sparrowfart. I'm definitely going to take that away as something I've learnt this evening. But something I wanted to ask you is, have you worked vintages elsewhere in New Zealand or Australia or anywhere else across the world? If not, where would you like to work a vintage?
Okay, yeah. Look, in my early years when I was, you know, free and single, and in the early training, so post going to Lincoln University and doing a winemaking degree, after I did a marketing degree, I went and worked at Simi Winery, which is in Healdsburg in the Sonoma. Pretty good Chardonnay program there. In those, you know, so that was sort of mid 90s. And then Cape Mentel in WA, which was brilliant. Really enjoyed that. And so my offside variety I sort of really enjoyed is probably Zinfandel, which is a bit interesting, you know, from WA and also out of Sonoma. And then I did a trip into Burgundy. Didn't work vintage, but had 3 weeks during vintage and went around a whole lot of Burgundy houses around there. The vintages at home in New Zealand, I cut my teeth at Villa Maria, and back in those days it was like the perfect place to learn hands-on in regards to, you know, the House of Villa is a superb educational ground for a huge amount of winemakers that have come out of New Zealand. Probably every second winemaker's probably done a vintage there in the early years. Hunters wines as well. And then I got picked up by Brent, so I had a good 15 years with Wither Hills, probably 10 years with Brent Maris, who's, you know, now I suppose the Ned is probably the brand. So I did a little bit of work with that Ned in the early years as well. So that's probably my learnings. And then I suppose I do a huge amount of judging domestically and overseas, mostly Australasia, and I think that just keeps your mind open and understanding styles. So you're still learning in that respect as well.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. We'd actually had another question about whether your judging affected your palate and your style. So good to hear that it does. You answered another question by accident. We've got Leah, and I don't know whether you've been unable to unmute this evening, Leah.
Yes, I'm here.
No. Hi, good evening, welcome.
Hi, thanks. Hi, Ben, good morning to you. I just wondered, do you culture any indigenous yeasts from the vineyard to start off your ferment? Or do you
yeah, look, good question, yep. All my Chardonnay and Pinot are what you call wild. So I don't know if it's necessarily cultured or we pick it up, but obviously vineyard yeasts come into the winery. But often what we've found over the years, and people have looked into it, and my business partner at the Coterie did it years ago, is those vineyard yeasts last about 3 or 4 days. And then it's the yeasts in the winery that really take off. And they've often been, even if you haven't used hydrated yeast or purchased, you know, yeast, it's the same form. So Cerevisiae and Bioanus, you know, tend to be strong, Saccharomyces, you know, and tend to take over. So all all the textural pieces and stuff they talk about is the first 4 or 5 days, and then the combination of yeast take over in that last 2/3. So the answer is, from a yes, but I'm under no illusions that there's a stronger yeast that's probably been hanging around and may have came from, hydrated or from other yeasts in the place to finish the wines off.
Fabulous.
And
Thank
that's
you very
probably
much.
being organics. Yeah, and Leah, probably being an organic point of view, it's all about the health of the vine. So my big challenge at the moment is to get that vine health up. So there's all that YANs, which is basically nitrogen and food for the yeast once it gets crushed and into fermenter's juice. So there's enough nutrients there for that yeast to give all the characters that we're after, and obviously to make the wine go dry.
Great, that's exactly what I was hoping you'd say. Thank you.
There we go. Fabulous. Unfortunately, the next member is unable to unmute, but Graham would like to know, you mentioned earlier that we are selling your wine at rather a good price. How do you price your wines?
Well, Freddie comes down to Marlborough and he points a finger at me, which is, I think it's like a gun, and goes, "This is the price, mate."
Perfect. Thank you, Ben. And of course, we have excellent relationships with all of our suppliers at the Wine Society, and we're able to, work out something which is agreeable for both parties. Next question, Anna. No, I'm joking. No, it's
Yeah, no, well put. Well put.
It's
it's. I think you've got to be pretty realistic. I think if you can price yourself in and out of a market, and so I run a pretty lean business. There's only 3 of us, and then there's a whole lot of family and stuff. So I think you've got, and particularly taking COVID into the case, you've got to run a pretty lean business and be happy with how it rolls. So I work both ways. I like seeing a full pricing tree. So this is a bit not technical, but of what Freddie's after and what his customer wants, and then I know my costs, and we try and meet in the middle, and each of us gets a good cut of that wedge, essentially. So I want to work with my distributor and ultimately those customers.
I think, Ben, that's kind of why. I mean, in the time that we've been working together, I think that's sort of why it's worked, because at the Wine Society, I can confidently say as a buyer at the Wine Society that we are absolutely not out to rip anyone off, but we also want to provide members with the best value possible. And it is, as you say, about kind of finding that sweet spot. At the end of the day, we want to be able to sell your wine successfully, and because I taste a wine, for example, just for example's sake, the Chardonnay. I taste that and go, God, that's bloody good. I want to be able to kind of share that joy with everyone else, all our Wine Society members, and it's about kind of getting it to a price really which I feel like people are gonna pay, and it's going to end up in their houses, and they're going to be enjoying it, but without you being in a difficult position. And it is a tricky one, and it does often involve kind of lots of conversations and sort of making sure everyone's happy. But I think that's probably a more complex question than it initially sort of sounds, isn't it? Kind of how do you work out your pricing? Yep.
I think the other thing too is always try and over deliver. So I don't want, you go and buy a bottle of wine, you go, oh yeah, I will go 15 quid today or whatever it is, and you go back and you don't enjoy it because you think it should be 12 quid. So that 3 quid is really important.
That's hard.
So I think I'd like to deliver an 18 quid wine for 15.
Yeah.
That's
absolutely.
sort of
that's the way to do it as well, isn't it? And I think we are very, it's a tough market in the UK, to be honest. And I think that most people who buy wine in the UK don't really think about, actually, this is one of the most competitive markets in the world. We've got so many wines in the UK from so many different countries, and there's so much competition for every single wine that's on the market in the UK. So pricing is a really, it's an interesting topic. But yeah, that's probably not really, that sort of hasn't answered the question, perhaps. But I think that's fine.
No, I think that's good. We're going to try and squeeze in one more question.
It's a good value for money wine, there you go.
Ben. There we go. And I would agree with that, absolutely. Paula, I hope that you have been able to be unmuted. Good evening, Paula.
Hi, Anne. Hi, Ben. Can you hear me?
We certainly can.
Yes, I can, Paula. How are you?
Excellent. I have so enjoyed your Chardonnay. I have to say, Chardonnay suffers a bit in the UK from, its reputation having been a bit suppressed, but this is just fantastic. And I've just paired it with some Roquefort, and I have to say it's sensational.
No, awesome. That's good. Yeah.
But Ben, the way you speak about winemaking reminds me a bit of the chef Heston Blumenthal. You're obviously a real technician, but also with a very clear vision of the sort of exciting and adventurous things you want to do. So if you could buy a plot of land anywhere in the world and grow some grapevines, where would you buy and why?
Oh dear, oh dear. I've never been there, but I'm really intrigued with Patagonia.
For any particular reason, Ben?
Look, I had a guy who worked for me in the 90s, really passionate about, and that's where he was from, and he was going back there to, put some stuff in the ground. And I think probably because it's a similar, what's that, latitude, across from where we are. And then the more traditionally, probably, I really love it, Italian, so sort of Piedmont, perhaps tucked in there, Paula. Nebbiolo, look, Nebbiolo is not far off from Pinot, so, from what it can deliver. So, yeah, a little plot in Piedmont would be pretty cool.
I hope that happens. That sounds like a marriage made in heaven, Ben.
Ben, thank you. Just briefly going back to the pricing thing, I think that a Patagonian whatever is probably going to be too expensive, so we're probably going to have to pass on that one, unfortunately. But
I think so.
Quite fascinating. So yeah, just conscious of time, but I just wanted to just touch again on the trip when I was out there with you. Well, pretty much a year ago, and it was my first trip to New Zealand, and I must admit I was a little bit unsure, I guess, of kind of what to expect. I mean, I'd been told it's a beautiful country, so I knew that was going to be a given. I was looking forward to seeing some orcs and some rings and so on, seeing some Gandalf, wandering around, the Lord of the Rings sort of stuff, but I didn't see much of that. Apart from in an airport, I think it might have been in Wellington or somewhere.
Yeah, Wellington Airport.
Yeah, that was a bit surreal, especially when you're kind of jet lagged and you've gone from one plane to the next and then you look up at Gandalf and a giant eagle. Very weird. But I must admit, I was expecting a ton of Sauvignon and sort of wasn't really sure about what else to expect. And I remember coming to you when I did, and that was actually one of the biggest days on the trip. I was seeing 7 wineries that day. And it was, I was feeling it. But when you kind of came along and sat down and we started tasting, I just immediately felt this kind of sense of, okay, this is really fun. This is fun. This is exciting, and this is good quality. And of course, there was the Sauvignon that we started with because we'd already been buying the Zephyr 6 from you. But then I tasted some of your other stuff, and I was just like, okay, wow. I just thought, wow, this just goes to show Marlborough is capable of so much more than just Sauvignon Blanc. The Sauvignon can be fantastic, as we all know, but the Chardonnay and Pinot, I thought absolutely delicious. I thought things like the Riesling as well, superb. But I was just thinking, that Chardonnay and that Pinot are so exciting for me, and I really wanted to kind of demonstrate to people that actually New Zealand is capable of so much more than just Sauvignon, and those 2 wines did that for me 100%. And so I was so pleased when the Chardonnay came through in the Champs tasting, because it was such a deserving winner. And I thought it was just testament to you and your ability and your passion and your personality, because I think a lot of the great winemakers around the world are also great personalities, and you've got to have a personality if you want to make interesting wine. And so Ben, testament to you. So thank you very much for joining us this morning. For you, of course, hopefully you don't have to do too much that's too strenuous today, but then you're a winemaker, so I doubt that's the case. So no doubt you get a few more coffees in you and you'll be fine.
I think so.
But yeah, I just wanted to say a big thank you, Ben. Big thanks to the tastings team for organising this as well, and Anna for hosting. That's fantastic. And huge thanks to all of our fantastic members for logging in and joining us this evening. So just like to raise a toast. Unfortunately not Chardonnay, I'm afraid, but I'll make up for that soon. To you and all the members. So cheers, and I'll see you again, I hope.
Thank you. And
That's awesome.
Ben, thank you for finishing what has been a great series of 7 winemakers. As I mentioned earlier, 4 different continents. To have so many of you log on this evening to share Ben's story, and hopefully more virtual events in the future. This might not be the last time we see you digitally, Ben.
Sounds good. Much better in person. So let's sort these borders out, eh? No, but look, hey, on behalf of Zephyr and the team here, thank you very much, Anna and Freddie and Co. and Wine Society and all your members. I mean, it's absolutely fantastic to be part of it. And so pleased we caught up with you 12 months ago, young man. So,
even if it did feel like 2 years ago.
Jeepers of age. Look at all that grey hair there. Yeah. No, it's absolutely awesome. Look, and look, 2020 looks fantastic. So we're pretty happy here at Marlborough, even through all the, all the viral sort of issues we've had to contend with through a harvest time. So, of
course.
Look, thank you very much.
Worth saying, we'll have the 2020 Zephyr 6 Sauvignon to taste, for members to buy in October sort of time. So we're excited for that.
Yeah, bottling end of this month and then into it. So that's really cool. That's great.
Yeah, really excited for it. Well, thank you, Ben, and thanks, Anna, and everyone else. It's been an absolute pleasure. And see you all again soon.
Great.
See you soon.
Cheers, guys. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.